Hello everyone, and thank you for taking the time to take a look at my project on assessment issues, and my topic being fairly grading collaboration. Now, I thought that this would be a good topic for me because in the science classroom you do a lot of group work within the lab, and it can often come down to one group for one grade. So I wanted to look at assessment of group assessments and projects and how we could do that in a way that is fair and consistent with best practice. So as I first started looking into this topic, my initial research question was, how can group work be graded fairly? And as I got digging into the research a little bit, looking through a couple of my first papers that I was reading through, I started to refine my question down a little bit based off of the idea that group grades should become individualized. So I refined my question for research here to how can individual grade be effectively derived from a group project, as that seems to be the direction that most of the research was suggesting. So if we're looking at individual grades, why even use group work in the first place? Well, there are several reasons to why group work is a very good thing in the classroom. First, our classrooms are in the process of changing to emphasize 21st century skills. As technology starts to take over a little bit more and more, the traditional model of academics is starting to become outdated, and we're looking for the incorporation of more 21st century skills like collaboration and teamwork and communication and more authentic projects in the classroom for students to be working on. So group work fits very nicely into that model. Also, group work can easily increase student engagement. Students are more likely to be engaged with what they're doing when they're not passively sitting and receiving direct instruction, when they're actually up, hands-on, doing and working on things, especially when working on things with their peers. Also, group work can increase student ownership over their own work. As students are in there doing things, it requires them to take a certain level of ownership over what they're doing and really start to take command over their own learning as opposed to expecting it to be given to them. Also, the idea of group work is very consistent with what we know as the best practice for learning, as looking at how neurons work and neural networks. When we're looking at using group work provides a concrete experience from which students can then build their knowledge off of. Because again, we know learning needs to be attached to something in our neural networks in order to become meaningful to us. Alright, so then if group work is such a good thing, why not assess groups together? Well, there are a couple good reasons that have been pointed out in the research, and some of them are, for example, group grades can undermine student motivation. Some of the high-achieving students might lose some motivation as they throw their hands up in the air about losing a lot of the control they might have over the project, or they might lose the motivation to be working with their team as they are having to carry the weight of to get their project to the level they would like it to be at. Also, assessing groups together contradicts the meaning of grades. If we're looking at a grade being the measure of what a student knows and can do in a certain content area, if we're assessing group work, we're not only assessing what an individual can do, but also we're removing clarity from that picture by adding in the contributions of other people into an individual student's grade. And that kind of contradicts what we understand a grade to be. Students can also become what's known as a free rider, where they aren't pulling their own weight because they don't feel the need to. They feel like they can latch on and go with what others are, with the contributions of others, and really feed off of other group members' work. So that becomes an issue when assessing groups together. Also, there seems to be we seem to weaken the growth mindset through the use of group grades. As we grade things as a group, students become less and less motivated by effort, as they see that maybe things aren't always in their control. So we want to make sure that we're not undermining that growth mindset, which we know to be very effective for students, with that understanding of more effort leads to more achievement. And I think our grading practices should match that philosophy and that mindset. Okay, so now if we want to grade individually, we need to look at how can we effectively assess group work on an individual level. And various methods have been presented in the research for how to assess individuals in a group. And most of them come down to being based on determining the contribution of individual students in a project through the use of peer assessment, where we take a look and let students go ahead and grade the contributions of the members of their team. However, certain research does show this tends to have a low reliability, where even with very strict standards and very laid out criteria for how to evaluate members in a group, different group members can tend to evaluate differently, or different groups evaluate differently from other groups, where some groups might be more lenient than others, some groups might be more, they might be a little bit stricter on what they're expecting out of their group's collaborative effort. So there is an issue with the reliability that comes up when using peer evaluations to determine individual contribution. Also, familiarity with the group has been shown to reduce objectivity in grading and using those peer assessments effectively. As teams get more and more familiar with each other, or if students get to self-select into their groups, there's less likely the chance that they'll be the validity will go down, as they're going to be less objective in their assessment of group contributions from each member of the team. Other methods, though, have been introduced that also involve separating individual and group tasks, where students are expected to come up with an individual performance based on the group work. So students would write, for example, in science, they could write a lab report on their own based on their group's effort in the lab. Some people might see this as maybe lacking a level of fairness too, as it's still, the individual effort then is still linked to the group effort, but some research did show it is difficult to achieve high marks without contributing strongly to the group. So at least on the lower side, it's difficult for any student that may want to be one of those free riders to go ahead and achieve a higher score. However, in that same research, it did show there was very little enhancement to a grade based on high contribution. So that's one area that might need a little bit more investigation. A couple of the most interesting pieces of research that I wanted to pull out and look at with you guys in here were the focusing on peer assessments. One thing that was found to be effective is using them early and often. Most of us think about peer assessment as happening at the end of the project once everything's done. Students then go through and grade the work of their teams. However, it's been shown in research that positive effects of peer assessment are time dependent, and they need to happen earlier in order to be a positive thing for the group. So in a study by Brooks and his team, early and frequent use of peer assessment was shown to do a couple of things. It was shown to reduce the likelihood of students to be free riders and feed off of the rest of the group's contributions. And it also provided an assessment system that fostered learning, as students got checkpoints along the way to how they were doing, as far as how their peers thought they were doing, as far as contributing to the group and the process. They could see where they were at and then make adjustments accordingly. So it added kind of that formative assessment piece into the entire process instead of just waiting for the end. I thought that was one interesting piece of research. A second interesting piece I thought was the use of technology to entirely remove the reliance on peer evaluation. There was a team, Lambert and his team. They investigated using a wiki in order to used technology to track group members' contributions. So their focus was not on having teams report on how they were doing. Their focus was on actually allowing the instructor to view and see contributions. So that way the final grade could be individualized, based on a group project, and determined entirely by the instructor. They'd be adding a little bit more reliability into the final grading. It was also in their system, it went to develop teamwork, because basically that's the system that Lambert's team was using was the wiki online would track when edits were made, by who they were made, and who made comments on them. So students could get, there were certain criteria laid out for students where they would get contribution points for putting pieces into the wiki, as well as leaving feedback for other students on how to improve different parts of the work that other team members were doing, as well as taking and using the feedback of other group members. So it really developed more of a sense of teamwork and getting people to work together and looking at peer editing different parts of the project, and it really took away the need for peer evaluation throughout the process. And I thought that was something interesting that I'm definitely interested to look a little bit more into. Maybe are there other technological ways to individualize a group's grade, or to individualize a group grade down to one individual student. So thank you for taking the time to look at where we're at right now. I've really enjoyed going through a lot of this stuff on group work and how to effectively assess it, and I'm looking forward to hearing what a lot of you have to say about all of your topics. So again, thank you for taking the time to look through my presentation, and